Welcome back to the B2B Uncut podcast, sponsored by Oro Commerce. I am once again your host, Aaron Sheehan, and I'm joined by someone who probably doesn't need a lot of introduction to this audience, because if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you've seen his face or heard his voice over the last several years in the B2B commerce space. I'm talking, of course, about Jason Greenwood. I'll let him introduce himself because there's so many ways you could describe yourself. And I don't know the right way to do it. So let's just start with, who are you and how are you describing yourself these days, Jason?
Look, thank you so much for having me on the pod, Aaron. Hopefully I'd like to think of myself as a friend to the e-commerce industry, and specifically the B2B e-commerce industry, and someone who, I've said this on my own show before, that this industry has been exceptionally good to me. It's given me a lifestyle I could have only dreamt of 25 years ago when I joined this industry. And I look at everything I do nowadays mostly through the lens of giving back. How can I give back the best, the deepest, the hardest, the fastest to the industry in every way that I can, from supporting the B2B e-commerce association in every way that I can and emceeing their events, to, running my own consultancy in the B2B e-commerce space, to having my own podcast our Wednesday episodes are 100% focused on B2B, to kind of everything I do these days is through that lens of sending the ladder back down again and trying to help the industry get better, do better, and be better. But I have a wonderful life. I was born and raised in Southern California. I lived in New Zealand for almost 30 years, where I built my career initially. And then for the last 2.5 years, we've been living in Puebla City, Mexico, which is about 2 hours southeast of Mexico City, with me, my wife, and our 2 dogs. It was one dog originally that we brought with us from New Zealand who was a rescue, but we recently brought another dog into our home who was a street dog rescue here in Mexico. We don't have any kids. We don't plan to have any, so our dogs are our children. But yeah, this industry, I love it. I travel the world speaking at conferences and trying to help as many businesses as I can get better and do better and be better in this B2B e-commerce space. So, man, that's kind of it. I try to put out as much content as I can, try to publish content almost every single day in one format or another, or across one channel or another. So that's my life at the moment, is just loving and living what I do. And I still, it's interesting. I still get up as excited today as I did 25 years ago when I joined this industry. I'm just as excited. I told you I started my meeting started this morning at 7:30 a.m. and I have not taken a break. In fact, before I jumped on here, I shoved some food in my face at my desk here just to be able, before I jumped on the call here. And that's how excited I am. I have wall-to-wall meetings almost all day, every day, and I just can't imagine doing anything else still 25 years later.
That's amazing. What a good answer. What a good answer to have that kind of enthusiasm. And a friend to the B2B commerce industry, I think, is good. If that's not the show title, maybe. Well, we'll see what other good witty bon mots we come up with, like, in the course of the show. But a friend to the industry is a good place to start. When we were sort of like, when I was thinking about sort of topics for this, we could talk about just about anything, I think, around the concept of B2B e-commerce. But there was something that you've written about before that I've seen over a decade of doing this myself, which is in the world of manufacturing and distribution. And I'm just fresh back from quite a few trade shows and conferences myself and speaking to our customers. But it is interesting how often people that we're trying to serve are using a sort of a technology system that they have built themselves to supply what we'll call e-commerce. But typically, what does e-commerce even mean in the B2B context is a really low, sort of like wide-ranging question. But we'll say everything from product discovery through RFQ, CPQ, through a web catalog, through punch out, through direct web orders, through portals, through all of those things. Sure, EDI, there's an endless. But a lot of times, the solutions that are in place with the companies that you and I speak with, they built them themselves, or they built pieces of it themselves on top of like a very old ERP, an IBM mainframe, some kind of green screen system, or maybe even a more modern ERP that's simply not doing any of the things they need to do. So they sort of it has APIs. So we'll build it. We'll build a thing. We'll build it using SQL stored procedures and ASP.NET and Microsoft Silverlight or whatever we have laying around or had laying around 20 years ago. How often do you see custom systems in place when you are starting the conversation with someone who is looking at leveling up their B2B tech stack?
It's not, for me, it's not that often. I would say it's less than 25% of the time that I see sort of bespoke, homegrown commerce technology built on top of like their ERP. Oftentimes their ERP is still a green screen sort of text-based ERP system of some description, and curses type of a screen. But I don't see that as much nowadays. I have two, it does occasionally happen, and it's mostly in scenarios where there's like a PE roll-up. I was working with a PE roll-up recently where they have 60 global business units in the industrial supplies sector. They're a distributor and a manufacturer actually in the industrial supply sector. They're a PE roll-up, 60 different global business units that have been bought up by this PE and sort of mashed together. Some of them were already related to each other, and then they've added on other global systems. They have over 40 ERPs globally that they run. And so in some instances, they've got, for some business units in some regions, they've got these bespoke commerce layers that they've built on as apps on top of their ERPs. In some instances, they've got no commerce at all. In about half of the cases, they do no e-commerce at all in any meaningful way, apart from maybe EDI in some instances. And then in the other scenarios, they've taken some off-the-shelf technology, bolted it into their ERP, but it's not fit for purpose. It was, oftentimes it's B2C-focused technology that they've kind of made work and kludged together to work with their ERP. But outside of those kind of roll-up scenarios, I just don't see a ton of homegrown stuff anymore. But what I do see a ton of is what Oliver Rhodes refers to as the dark stack, which is that there
shadow
are
IT.
Yeah, shadow IT, right? And a lot of these systems, especially legacy systems in the B2B world that don't have APIs or in no meaningful APIs, where they're using, CSVs dumped to an SFTP server. They don't have a proper PIM system, so they use a whole bunch of Google Sheets as their PIM system, and they connect that. They spit those out to CSVs that get dumped onto an SFTP server and then via an OBDC connector get uploaded into an ERP system or something like that. So we see a lot of kludges that, a lot of B2B organizations, they might not have a head of digital. They might not have a head of e-commerce. They might not have that, but what they usually have is a head of IT. And so the IT person, whether they're director of IT or whatever their title is, VP of IT, whatever it is, or oftentimes they might have a business systems title, head of business systems or something like that. They are called upon to make whatever was there when they got there work with everything else, old or modern. And so they oftentimes have spit and baling wire holding these systems together because oftentimes they haven't, I was pitching to a industrial supplies distributor, mainly fasteners, operating in the ANZ region recently, and their ERP is 20 years old. So like it's 20 years old and it hasn't been updated in like a decade. And it was a local ERP provider that really only operates in the ANZ region. It's basically a bespoke application. They are the biggest customer of this ERP vendor. And so, yeah, it doesn't see a lot of development. And so they're staring down the barrel of, okay, do we do commerce first, try to make it work with this old legacy crap, or do we do a ERP replatform first because we need a solid foundation to build on and we just don't think this ERP is going to cut it? And there's a lot of custom code in there that makes integrating with it super difficult. And these are the challenges that I face most often is, do we start with commerce or do we start with some other back office system that is 20 plus years old that is just not ready for modern commerce?
Totally. And it's one of the reasons I think we probably see it more than you do. I see it more than you do. And that may just be a factor of like when people engage with both of our businesses.
Yes.
But it's one of the reasons why I sort of describe e-commerce quite broadly at the beginning, because you're right. There are a lot of companies who have this sort of shadow IT organization built, but they're not doing e-commerce in a way that you and I would sort of obviously recognize as like, oh, there's some sort of customer self-service like ability to find and order stuff on the web,
but or something like that.
You're right. There may not even be a portal at all. Like it may simply be, as you said, a lot of FTPing spreadsheets around in order to get to the point where I can generate a quote and hand type it into the ERP, get pricing, and then send an email or place a call back to the buyer and say, yes, it's approved and here's how much it's going to cost. I'm curious, and you alluded to this just a moment ago, but what do you feel are sort of like the internal politics or org decisions in a company that does not have a chief digital officer, which I think is pretty fair to say that a lot of folks don't. How is, you said shadow IT. Shadow IT implies the existence of unshadowed IT, and therefore it must mean that there is some beleaguered person holding an IT title and budget who I'm imagining is kind of in a room with the door locked while people are running a business around them. That's a little bit what goes into my head when I hear about shadow IT. What organizational decisions go into getting you into the point where that's how you're running your business?
Oftentimes, in my experience, it's because these particularly distributors, they often, I would say greater than 80% of the clients that I deal with in the distribution space, they're family-owned businesses, and they're like second, third generation family-owned businesses. They're 50, 75, in some cases 100-year-old family-owned and run businesses. They've done things the same way for forever. They've relied on personal relationships in the industry to get them where they are. They're sellers, meaning that their field reps, for example, have grown up alongside the buyers in the industry. They go to the same events. They go to the same conferences. They go to the same ball games. They go to the same boozy drinks on a Friday. That's how they've kind of built their bread and butter customer base. But what they're increasingly starting to realize is that their buyer demographic is changing and getting younger. It's aging down. People, the traditional buyers in the industry, a lot of them are aging out of the industry. And so they're being replaced by a younger generation of buyer who are largely digital natives. And so, and increasingly, even the field sales teams or the experts in the industry with the tribal and industry knowledge, they're retiring or aging out or dying out of the industry. And as a result of that, we now have a younger generation, both the buy side and the sell side. And so the sell side expects modern tooling to be able to sell at scale without having to do everything manually, because they're like, I don't want to spend, if I'm a field sales guy and I'm incentivized on my sales numbers and on commission, I'm commissioned on that, I don't want to spend 60% of my time doing manual admin tasks. That is not fun. And that doesn't add any more value to me, and it doesn't add any more value to my customer. On the flip side, the buying demographic is aging down and becoming younger. And so they have an expectation of digital self-service. And even if it's not digitally self-serving the transaction, there's many other things that they expect to be able to self-serve. They expect to be able to check inventory levels. They expect to be able to check price levels. They expect to be able to search the catalog. They expect to be able to request a quote electronically. They expect to be able to lodge an RMA electronically. They expect to be able to do all these things, to download a previous invoice that got lost in the email, or, they expect to be able to check the status of their credit account or which payment methods they have available to them, or all these different things. Who's my assigned account manager? I should be able to log in and see who that is. If I don't know who that is, I should be able to, send a live chat. I should be able to do all these things in a self-service way, what I call, and I coined the term DSL, digital services layer. I coined that term a couple of years ago to refer to all the non-transactional digital services that B2Bs should be providing to their customers and that their customers expect beyond the transaction. And that's the place where I think these evolving expectations meet the reality of current systems and processes. And that's where the sparks fly, because these businesses who have a very, very entrenched way of doing things often are challenged because they know they have to adapt. They know they have to modernize, but they just don't even know where to begin. That's the thing. They're going, okay, where do we start? Where do we start with the team? Do we start with the org design? Do we start with the process design? Do we start with the technology stack? Where the hell do we start on this journey? We got to plant a flag in the sand somewhere of where we begin this. We know this is a forever journey. We know that this is not a one and done thing. Usually they know that by the time they get to me, but they just don't know where to start. And they need some direction initially to be pointed in the right direction.
So really good points, and I agree with a lot of that. I'm curious, is IT the team that you reach out to? I'm working with a company right now where, they're in a very similar place to what you just described, right? A lot of silos, a lot of black boxes, a lot of old school ways of doing things. And there's sort of like, there's an agreement at the top, at the CEO level, hey, we need to modernize. This is a mid-market distributor. And IT is sort of like handed okay, we'll go, this is clearly an IT problem, go figure it out. And I'm speaking with their head of IT last week, and he was a little bit like, well, we're good. We know how to evaluate a system, and we know how to evaluate risk and compliance and interoperability. We know how to negotiate a contract even. We know how to CapEx things because we have finance partners who work with us to understand how exactly to get to amortize a big IT purchase out over 5 to 10 years, depending on what it is. What we don't know is what our customers want. And we don't know what our sales team wants. And we don't know organizationally how to structure an e-commerce platform purchase and implementation around adoption. That's where, IT understands how to go buy stuff, but often are not necessarily the most empowered stakeholder for understanding how sales and fulfillment and customer service all come together and need to come together to make it work. I'm curious, when does the pain of this sort of like homegrown shadow IT, we'll do it ourselves approach tend to manifest? Is it a security thing? You seem to be, I think you would say probably internal adoption from the answer you gave previously, but what kicks these conversations off?
In my case, more often than not, it's pressure from the customer.
Got it.
So it's the customer saying, okay, Mr. Manufacturer, Mr. Distributor, Miss Distributor, Miss Account Manager, Mr. Account Manager, this no longer works for our business. We're a marginal business. We make 3% net margins. If we have to procure off you in our traditional way of procurement, and that costs us an extra couple of basis points, well, that's material, versus if we can go and work with this new distributor or this new manufacturer that manufactures a similar product, but we can do 95% of what we interact with them in an automated way through, say, for example, our e-procurement system, automatically talking to their systems and streamlining that process from the buy side, then we're going to make that move every single time. Or we're going to come to you and we're going to ask for an additional discount on everything you sell to us to cover the additional cost of us doing business with you. And that kicks off the conversation. So therefore, it's usually the sales team that escalates those types of concerns and requests to the management and says, hey, customer A, it's a big, big customer of ours. They're saying it's too painful to do business with us today because it's too manual, and they've got to cross all these T's, dot all these I's. Maybe they got to send us a fax. Maybe they got to do, it still exists. It's wild. But faxes still exist in the B2B world.
100%.
It blows me away. And so, so when I go in, one of the first questions I typically ask whoever has reached out to me initially is, what level of customer research and interviews and feedback have you done before you've met me? Like, have you even spoken to a cohort of your customers, and have you segmented them by customers? So I tend to encourage my customers to break up their total customer cohort into 3 buckets. Which group of customers do you think would adopt some sort of self-service e-commerce solution immediately the moment you offered it? Which group of customers would be on the fence and it would really take something special for them to adopt, a new technology versus ringing up Bob, their account manager, which they've been friends with for 20 years? And then what is the final cohort that you think, no matter what you did from a technical perspective and no matter how great of experience you created, they are never going to adopt any kind of digital solution that you might offer to them? Break it up into 3 and interview those 3 cohorts independently, a representative from each of those cohorts independently. Because the last thing we want to do, and the last thing a solution architect like me wants to do, is to go in and start architecting and designing something that is not fit for purposes and not likely to see high adoption by the customer base. That's the first thing. The second thing is we want to be implementing something that has the flexibility and capability to automatically include adoption, whether the customer realizes it or not. By that, I mean something like the AI sales agent that Oro brings to the table. There's more and more platforms today that are kind of including something similar into their platforms, where even if the customer continues to transact and communicate with you in the same way they always have, i.e. email, WhatsApp, Teams, Slack, whatever, that by definition, they're adopting your commerce solution, whether they realize it or not. Where when they send you an email with a PDF of a PO attached, or a CSV of a PO attached, or a plain text typing in the email, or an image attached to the email that was snapped of a screenshot, which I got demoed a customer of mine recently, they said, this is how dumb our customers are. And they didn't mean dumb as in they're dumb. They just meant not tech savvy. They said, look, the sales manager, he showed to me, he says, look at this. He goes, this is an email that I received from my customer who they create their purchase orders in a CSV on their screen, but my buyer, they don't know how to attach a CSV to an email. So what did they do? They take a screenshot on their phone of the CSV on their screen, and then they message that image to me from their phone and say, can you place this order for me?
Oh, this is such a good point, because what you just described is the shadow IT on the buy side. Correct. Which is a buyer using probably a non-company provided device to take a picture of proprietary pricing information, which is the CSV of the order that they want, with the SKUs, the quantities, the prices, and then in a, I won't say unsecure way, but like from a CTO or CIO's perspective, an unsecure way, then texting it or emailing it to the seller and expecting them to fulfill it based on that. And it's the shadow IT abounds. And I love that you brought up AI. I actually wasn't planning to, because we talk about it a lot and I try to avoid it sometimes if I can, which is not my job, but sometimes I just get tired of it. But what you've just described is why we've also built we call it sort of like a PDF purchase order to digital order, AI powered, smart order, basically is what we're calling it at Oro. But I've seen it work with exactly what you described: a picture of a screenshot, a picture of a product, as long as the name of SKU is visible in the box. Like if there's a visible label, like AI is, I think, more than anything else, such a great tool to take the sort of shadow IT habits of buyers and sellers and bring them into something that a CTO or CIO can manage. And in a way, because of that, it's more transformational than anything any of us have done in the B2B e-commerce industry for 20 years, because of the fact that, like, we're not asking people to change their behaviors. We can still get the positive ROI and digital quality improvement of a digital interaction, but if they want to keep taking a screenshot of their monitor and emailing it to you, we can make that work. And I think that's fundamentally one of the great things about AI, is that it doesn't force people to change their buying habits.
Well, and that's only been made possible through multimodal AI, and that's only a development realistically accessible within the last 6 to 12 months. And nowadays I can upload a PDF to ChatGPT, I can upload a CSV to ChatGPT, I can upload almost any format of data that I like. I can upload a PDF that's 100 pages long and ask it to give me a 2-paragraph summary of what's in that PDF, and it'll do it. I can ask it to tell me what the data presented in a 10-page CSV is and what it's trying to say to me, and it'll summarize it for me. So this multimodal AI thing has really helped us. We always had kind of the old school OCR type stuff, but it was so inaccurate so much of the time that it almost always required human input at some point along the value chain. Whereas with multimodal AI, we're getting to a place now where it's so good that, if it's not totally messed up data, it can make sense of that in the same way that a human would be able to parse that PDF.
That's exactly right. I think great observation there, and I appreciate the segue and the opportunity to plug our product. And so, what you said that you're sort of asking people up front. I thought this was such a great question, which is, who have you talked to before you called me? I've been on the receiving end of these calls before, and it is been historically true for me that a startling amount of time the answer is no one, or our own leadership. Basically,
my sales team. I spoke to my sales team.
I spoke to my sales team. I talked to my C-suite. I don't know. I was just handed this in a Monday morning meeting, and so then I started Googling. Like, that's the answer that you get sometimes. I think segmenting your customers is exactly right. I think there are also good ways to segment customers around margin and revenue growth opportunity, who buys the same 10 SKUs regardless. Because one of the things that I have heard so often, you asked a great question, which is the 3 buckets. And man, I love buckets. I segment stuff into buckets all the time. It's a great framing. But one of the things that I've heard, I'm curious about your thoughts are, I've heard, well, the portal or e-commerce is for the long tail customers. What they mean is that e-commerce is the cheap and cheerful way to serve the customers who they can't afford to stick an account executive on permanently. And so it becomes this sort of like catch-all for, well, this is maybe 5% of our revenue is peanut butter spread out across like hundreds or thousands of accounts. And that's who e-commerce is for. But don't worry, Bob, to use your example, Bob's never going to look at it because we have Bob's attached to our strategic accounts, and they'll always talk to Bob. How do you join the value proposition of technology is just the cheap way to serve the marginal customer to technology is a key retention play for the larger customer, and in fact, a way to grow revenue for the larger customer? Do you ever have that conversation with people?
Yes, and there's always 2 kind of responses that I give to this because it is such a common question. The first is, doesn't Bob or Jane, the account managers, don't they want tooling other than the ERP sitting in front of them? Because first of all, almost no sales org wants their sales reps messing around in their ERP. They don't want it. They have it that way today because there's no other alternative, but it's not something they want them routinely logging into an ERP to suck down information, edit information, change pricing models, They don't want them to be able to do that, but they have to let them do that today because it's the only system of record that they can actually have access to. That's the first thing. Most sales reps would much rather have a fit for commerce system that they can log into, that's easy to search for products, it's easy to search for their customers' pricing, it's easy to see the performance of their customers, it's easy to manage quotes. It's like they just want a system that they can do their job in that is fit for purpose for commerce, right? That's the first thing. So this isn't just about the customer. This is also about the teams serving your customer. They need a commerce system that is really ready to allow them to serve their customers at an ultra high level without having to search network drives for information and without having to check their desktop and save a whole bunch of spreadsheets to their desktop, and without having to create zip files, which I routinely see sales reps have to do. They have to download a whole bunch of stuff from different systems. They have to load it up onto their desktop, then they zip it up into a zip file and they send it off to their customers as an email attachment. This is a very regular thing that happens in the B2B world. So, the ability to check specs, the ability to filter and facet within categories of thousands of products, all that sort of stuff. Most ERPs are just they're not capable of this advanced capability around commerce. And then the second thing I would say is, even for your customers that are your largest customers, even for your customers that are doing business with you via EDI from a transactional perspective, or via, punch out and e-procurement via a transactional perspective, they still have the absolute expectation that they can self-serve many other things in their interaction with your business. I was recently leading a customer interview process on behalf of one of my customers. They were looking at implementing e-commerce for the very first time. And we went to their customers and we said, look, if we implemented e-commerce, would this matter to you? Would this be interesting to you? And they were like, no, I really like dealing with Bob, my account manager, because they look after me. I can pick up the phone any time of the day or night, and he'll answer the phone. I message him back and forth on WhatsApp. Like he gives me amazing service. And I'm like, well, okay, let's give this a little more nuance. What are the 1, 2, or 3 things you absolutely love about doing business with Bob and or this company that you're buying off of? What are the things that you love about doing business with them? And on the flip side, what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that are super painful about doing business with this supplier? And they said, look, they give us long credit cycles. They will procure custom products for us. In fact, they custom make certain products for us, and we get really good account management. But on the flip side, we never know when a containerized shipment of goods or an LTL shipment is actually going to hit our warehouse. Now, that's a problem for us because we have a receipting team that schedules all receipting. And so we need to know so that we don't have a container sitting on our dock for a week waiting for our receiving team to free up time to actually put these away on our, pallet racking, because we need forklift drivers, we need devanning team, we need the team that actually does the receiving and scans the goods in and checks it against the packing list. We have a big team. We have like a massive warehouse team that does all this work. But the problem is that we never know when this order is going to hit our dock, and as a result of that, we don't even get an update when it ships usually. And even if we get an update when it ships, there's no target delivery date. So if we could have somewhere where we could log in and we could track an order from the time it leaves their warehouse to the time it hits our warehouse so that we can schedule our receiving team, that would be amazing for us, because we could cut down the cycle time from the time we receive the goods to the time it's in our customer's hands and we make money. So this is the kind of thing where that customer never thought, the word e-commerce never hit their mind.
That's right.
Like I use the word e-commerce, but that's not the word they use. But I consider e-commerce all of the digital services layer, not just the buy now button. And so if we broaden the understanding of what e-commerce is and does, then it all of a sudden starts to make a huge business impact.
This is okay. So you're absolutely saying something that's been part of my, messaging and thought process, especially for the last 6 months, really for a long time, but especially for the last 6 months, as I've seen so many e-commerce platforms go after B2B as kind of a market for them. And yet when you press on that very much, a lot of times what you see is a very B2C understanding of, well, if I make the checkout faster, that's what these folks have been missing, is just a faster checkout. And that's actually not true. There's a lot of healthy friction in the B2B buying process that actually needs to be there by design. We did a buyer survey. Listeners to the podcast will know I've referenced this a few times in the last handful of episodes. It's out now. But we did a buyer survey of about 100 senior buyers in manufacturing and distribution, all kinds of sizes, but definitely in, I would say, the mid-market and enterprise, primarily on the buy side, right? And one of the questions we asked was, hey, if they basically mark, hey, I'm not satisfied with the buying experiences that I get from my suppliers. What should they do to improve things? And when you parse through the answers, you're right. The word e-commerce doesn't come up, but what they ask for are enhanced product information. So pricing is a big thing, transparent, reliable pricing, product videos, product guides, being able to find information about products like fitment and product attributes, inventory visibility.
Sheets, exploded drawings, simple, things that we think are simple.
Yes, exactly. Order tracking, to your point, real-time inventory, dashboards, and really a big one is communication and support channels. In other words, they want to be able to tell, this was a big one, probably the biggest one, is because we also asked the question, well, of the companies that are doing something that you really like, what are they doing? And it really comes down to communication. It's not about a faster cart. It's about, I'm going to do part of my journey online. I'm going to do part of my journey with a digital assist. And part of the journey may actually take place offline. And that's okay, as long as it's not taking me on the buy side or the sell side an absurd amount of bits basically to service the order, a bunch of cycles, a bunch of man hours, a lot of
team
surface
effort.
area for error. Yeah, for error. And it's about just bring Bob together with the buyer, but broker those interactions online so that the buyer can ask Bob that question contextually while they're looking at the quote, while they're looking at their dashboard, while they're looking at the product that they want to buy. And then that way they can have a much more productive conversation about it. And Bob can spend a third of the time that Bob would normally spend and be able to use the rest of that time upselling that customer, recruiting a new customer, following up on an inbound inquiry for someone who wants to establish an account with them, whatever it is, not tin-keying stuff into the ERP. So super glad you mentioned all of that. I want to pivot a little bit.
Hey, but before you go on,
okay.
I want to give a real life example of exactly what you just described. It's actually on a project that we're jointly working on right now, and the project is being implemented. And this is an exact example of a customer complaint into this supplier, their manufacturer and a distributor. They had a routine customer complaint in the old system that we are alleviating in the new system on Oro. But, it doesn't necessarily require Oro to do this. But we're solving this very problem that was a routine customer complaint, which was when we place an order and their average lines, I think it's average of 30 lines per order on their orders, their customer orders. Most of the time, there would be at least one of those line items that was out of stock. And so what they said was the biggest challenge is being able to split the order up and give the customer granular options about what they do with out of stock items. Should we wait to ship the whole order when that item comes into stock? Should we ship everything except the item that's out of stock? But then if there's an additional cost for shipping because we have to split the shipments, we have to let the customer know and give them the option. Or should we cover that? There's a whole bunch of business rules around order splitting, but they said that's not the major thing we're solving for. What we're solving for is when an item comes back into stock matters, meaning that if an item comes back into stock within 30 days, 99% of the time the customer still wants that item. If it comes into stock after 30 days, 9 times out of 10, they've found an alternate product or an alternate supplier, and we've gone back to them and found an alternate product that will work in that application. And what we're doing today is that we're automatically shipping back orders as soon as they're back into stock without revalidating with the customer that they even still need that item. And we need an automated way to give the customer an option to revalidate that they still want that order. So what we've built in is a workflow into Oro that triggers off a transactional email once the inventory comes back above zero and back into stock again, that we effectively put a hold on the status of that order that's back ordered. And we look at when it comes back into stock, we look, is it under 30 days or over 30 days? If it's over 30 days, we send a transactional email to the customer where they have to click a button to say, yes, I still want this item. I still need this item. Now it puts it back into the queue for processing and shipment. Okay. And it automates that entire end-to-end process for them and the customer. So this is solving the pain point for the customer, but it's also solving the pain point for the supplier, because in 99% of the cases where they were shipping more than 30-day-old back orders, that 99% of the time the customer needed to return that item.
Yes.
So then they lost all the money that they made on the initial order in the first place. So this is the type of thing where I think e-commerce is that's a fuzzy term, right? Like automation and commerce mixed together in a blender start to create some pretty cool stuff.
I love it. I love it. That's such a good example, and it's one of the things that when I was interviewing at Oro and got a demo of the product, and I saw the workflow engine, and it blew me away because it's not that it by itself, it's a feature that is what the kind of thing you normally see in kind of like big whiz bang demos and stuff like that. It's not headless, it's not composable, it's not faster
AI.
search, or it's not AI, right? Exactly. But what it is it's the engine to power that kind of automation where it's a mix of in-person interactions or digital interactions and automations to get to a business outcome that's acceptable for everybody that doesn't require having a bunch of people manually shepherding it along the process, because you cannot scale a business if everything requires that much intervention. I wanted to switch gears a little bit here, and I'm cognizant of we have limited time left, but I know that one of the things that you do, and you, as you outlined, you're working with one of our customers and one of our agency partners as well. What's your go-to tool for documenting the kinds of requirements that you capture? The example that you just shared, right? Perfect. How did you capture that? How did you write that down? How would you recommend your customers, the actual manufacturers and distributors, think about documenting these kinds of like internal user stories?
Yeah, very good question. I am very simplistic in the way that I run my discovery, but where I think I excel. So I use a Google form to do discoveries. And
nice.
So it's like about 150 to 200 questions. Some of them are multiple choice answers. Some of them are just a paragraph, a blank paragraph where, here, describe to me this. Describe to me this process. Describe to me, from the point a product is received to the point where it gets into your ERP to the point where it's placed into inventory. Like I'll describe certain processes that they need to describe back to me. What are the steps along the chain to execute this process in the business? And so then I'll get into the sales, and we've got like 5 major sections of the discovery. And one of those is the sales cycle and the sales process. And what does that look like? Who's involved? What are the steps involved? What channels do you currently sell through? What channels do you currently communicate through? What internal tooling do you use to get information into the customer's hands? We get into some quite granular detail, but I'm of the firm opinion that if you ask better questions, you get better answers. And in fact, one of the ways that I demonstrate capability or knowledge or experience is just by, I think, asking the best questions or some of the best questions in the industry. And I know people new to the industry, they like half the questions on my discoveries, they wouldn't even know to ask those questions because they've never bumped into those scenarios before. So they wouldn't even know that kind of question needed to be asked. And so that's where I think someone with 25 years of experience, that starts to matter, because ChatGPT doesn't have those 25 years. Like, I have never documented those 25 years worth of experience in great detail somewhere where ChatGPT can ingest that. And,
right.
and it can't do on the fly follow-up questions. So after the customer completes the questionnaire, I go back and then I do workshops. And we walk through all their answers, and then we cover any questions that they couldn't answer because they either didn't understand the question or couldn't get the answer inside the business and they needed some guidance. And then what we do is I make sure I understand their answers, but then I ask subtle little nuanced follow-up questions and give some on-the-fly consulting by saying, here's 2 ways that I've typically seen it done to deal with this scenario. Which of these approaches feel like a better fit for you? Or is there a third approach that I have never seen before that feels like it would be a better solution for you in your specific use case? And so I think on the fly, little snippets of consulting based on specific experiences I've witnessed before work out well versus not work out well. That's where I think the discovery starts to add real value. And I've had CEOs message me and say, that was the best discovery experience I have ever had in all of any IT project we've ever had. And I now know more about my business than I ever
love it.
before.
Yes. I share all of that, all of those experiences and relate to them very strongly. It's always a point of amusement to me how often, as the architect coming into a requirements conversation, you're sitting around the boardroom back when people sat around the table in boardrooms, right? And you realize that your job is really to almost broker an internal meeting more than it is for anything else, where you will sit there for a 2-hour discovery and say 3 things, and you're watching the customer service, you're watching sales, you're watching IT, you're watching ops, and they're just ping-ponging off of each other. And usually somebody from the C-suite is sitting there just watching it with 1,000-yard stare because they've never experienced their business talked about in this way. It's one-on-one conversations happening in silos, and decisions making are happening in silos, and having everybody together sort of like using e-commerce or any kind of IT project as the lens to just blow it all out, man. Just let's look at everything and how it works together. And you know what always happens at the end of those conversations, Jason? More projects.
What's that?
More projects.
Yes, exactly.
Because once you start flipping over rocks, you start finding bugs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you say exactly that, because I was consulting to a mid-market distributor, about a $300 million a year distributor in their space, privately owned, family owned. The son of the founders, now is the CEO of the company, had been the CEO for about the past 10 years. He was in our first discovery. He's actually, to his credit, he was in every single discovery workshop, to be honest. And at the end, it was quite interesting, because at several points during the discovery, where he was mostly just sitting there, he wasn't saying much. He was just letting all the subject matter experts in the business give their feedback. At one point, he looked over at somebody and he said, "Is that really how we do that?" He goes, "I had no idea that's how we did that." And he's like, when did that change? When did that process change? Because he goes, "I didn't think we did it that way." And so oftentimes it is literally an opportunity, because there's the kind of as intended process, but then there's the as implemented process so that people can actually do their day job. And sometimes there's workarounds, there's organic processes that get developed to deal with certain edge cases, etc., so that people can get their job done every day. And the CEO isn't in the middle of those granular decisions every single day. And so if it's been 6 months since they've spoken to the head of a department, they oftentimes do not know what that department does to get the job done every day.
You've seen the tire swing cartoon. I'll link to this in the
show notes.
In the show notes, but it's the sort of like, it's the how the customer explained it, how the project leader understood it, how the analyst designed it, and it sort of like goes on and on, and then at the end is sort of like what the customer really needed. And yes. Like at none of these two, there's like I think like 8 or 10 images and panels in this comic, and none of them look alike, because it's a game of telephone. Wow. It's a game of telephone, and at no point is what the customer really needed was ever on anybody's radar.
Yes, which is scary.
Yes. And we'll leave billing out of it completely, because that's a separate conversation. We're about done. Jason, I'm going to ask you the question I ask all the guests on this podcast at the end, and it's a surprise question that we've not talked about before, and it is this. What is one piece of media, book, TV show, a movie, a podcast, a magazine article, whatever, that you've engaged with in the last few months that stood out to you that you would recommend to other people? And it does not need to be serious, but it can. If you want to give me a serious one and a non-serious one, a lot of people choose that particular door. So super curious.
I think I'm going to go down a slightly different route for my answer. I am going to talk to you more about a movie I want to see later this year. And it's supposed to come out. I saw the trailer for it last night. I think I just saw it when I was scrolling through Instagram, I think is how I saw this trailer, and it just popped up in my feed. Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie, a big, bold, beautiful journey. And it's apparently, the trailer was so fascinating. I was like, I will 100% go and see this movie without question. It's apparently, it's meant to be a romantic fantasy. It follows David Farrell and Sarah Robbie, strangers who meet at a wedding and embark on a surreal journey prompted by a mysterious GPS exploring pivotal moments from their past and contemplating their futures. The cast also includes Kevin Kline, Phoebe. But the interesting about this is it's not just about their current life. It's about their past lives and how they have interacted with each other in previous lives and how it brought them to where they are today in their current life. Super interesting. Like, I just thought the plot super interesting. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this movie. I'm a big movie buff. But since COVID, I have to be honest, I haven't seen a lot of great movies since COVID, and there haven't been many. I think Top Gun Maverick right up there in one of the
excellent
favorites.
Excellent movie.
Then, I've seen maybe 3 or 4 that were standouts, but I used to go to the movies like once a week pre-COVID, And now I'm lucky if I go once a month now to the movies. Lucky.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe once every 2 or 3 months now.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to pull off now, but all right. Well, we will link to that. Actually, I'll see if I can find the trailer. We can link to it in the show notes. I've not heard of this. I'm getting some serious sort of like Before Sunrise almost vibes, you know, the bright, Linklater's Before trilogy. So kind of sounds like maybe an updating of that. And since that didn't end on an especially happy note, maybe we need to restart that genre of sort of romantasy movies. I just made that word up. It might be a real
I love
word.
it. I love it.
Yeah.
I think we should make it part of the modern lexicon.
Perfect. Well, let's do that. Jason Greenwood, thank you so much for your time and joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Some very good lessons learned and advice shared with our audience. And I am 100% positive that we are going to see each other again and talk to each other again in the near future.
I'll see you at B2B e-commerce world in Arizona, in
Scottsdale, Arizona. I will be there, in fact, and you will be there with the rest of the B2B e-commerce association and your fellow ambassadors.
Can't wait. Look forward to it, brother. See you there.
Fantastic. See you there. Thank you, Jason.